For 3 months, the Alpha King never met her eyes. Not once. Not when she healed his warriors. Not when the Oracle chose her, a nobody, as his fated mate. Not even when the palace whispered that he despised her. But at midnight, when the bells rang through the cold stone halls, the Alpha King finally broke. And the truth he confessed? It wasn't hatred. It wasn't rejection. It was the secret he'd bled to keep. The one thing he swore she could never know. Tonight, she learns why he couldn't look at her. And why the moment he finally did changed everything. Aria had been in the palace for 3 months, and the Alpha King had never once met her eyes. She told herself it didn't matter. She was a healer, not a queen. She'd been chosen by the Moon Oracle in a ceremony that still felt like a fevered dream, her name called out before the entire pack, the silver light settling on her shoulders like a brand. The elders had whispered prayers. Her mother had wept. And Aria had walked toward the palace gates knowing her life would never be the same. What she hadn't known was that she would spend every day since then feeling like a ghost. The palace was vast and cold, all marble corridors and echoing footsteps. Aria kept to the healing wing, mixing salves and tending to minor wounds, always careful to stay out of the way. The other servants were kind enough, but distant. The warriors nodded at her in passing, but never lingered. And the court whispered. She wasn't meant to be chosen, one lady-in-waiting had murmured behind a silk fan. The Oracle must have made a mistake, another agreed. Look at her. She's nothing special. He despises her. Anyone can see it. Aria had learned to walk with her head down, to make herself small, to pretend she didn't notice the way conversation stopped when she entered a room, or the way the Alpha King's golden eyes slid past her as if she were made of air. Today was no different. She was carrying a tray of medicinal herbs down the western corridor when she heard the heavy footsteps. Her heart seized. She knew that gait, steady, commanding, inevitable. Alpha King Kale. Aria pressed herself against the wall, clutching the tray to her chest. He rounded the corner with 2 of his generals, his expression carved from stone. He was impossibly tall, shoulders broad beneath the dark leather of his uniform, his black hair tied back in a way that made the sharp angles of his face even more severe. Beautiful. Terrifying. Untouchable. She kept her eyes lowered as he approached. But then he stopped. The generals continued a few steps before realizing their king was no longer beside them. Aria's breath caught. She could feel him there, barely 3 feet away, could sense the weight of his presence like a storm about to break. She dared to glance up. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. For one impossible moment, she thought he might speak. His lips parted. His golden eyes flickered toward her face. Then he turned sharply and walked away. The generals exchanged a glance before following. Aria stood frozen in the hallway long after they'd gone, her hands trembling around the tray. She didn't understand. She would never understand. He can't even stand to look at me, she thought, and the pain of it was a knife between her ribs. What Aria didn't see was the way Kale stopped at the end of the corridor, bracing one hand against the wall, his entire body rigid with restraint. What she didn't hear was the low, tortured sound that escaped his throat before he forced himself to keep walking. That evening, Aria returned to the healing wing to put away her supplies. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the arched windows, and the palace felt emptier than usual. She was reaching for a jar of dried lavender when voices drifted in from the courtyard below. Warriors. Training, most likely. Did you hear? The king's sending her away. Aria's hand froze. The healer? When? Soon. He told the council this morning. Says she'll be safer at the northern outpost. Safer? Or does he just want her gone? Laughter. Low and knowing. Can you blame him? Poor girl. Chosen by the Oracle and rejected by her own king. Aria's vision blurred. The jar slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone floor, lavender scattering like ash. She didn't bother to clean it up. She walked numbly back to her small room in the servants' quarters, closed the door, and sank onto the narrow bed. She had tried. She had tried so hard to be useful, to be invisible, to not be a burden. And still, it wasn't enough. She pressed her face into her hands and cried as quietly as she could, the way she'd learned to do everything in this place, without taking up too much space. Outside, the midnight bells began to toll, their deep voices echoing through the palace like a promise. Somewhere in the tower above, Kale stood at his window, staring out at the darkened mountains. His fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. And in his chest, a truth he would not speak burned like a curse he could not break. The infirmary smelled of antiseptic and pine, a combination that had become as familiar to Aria as breathing. She worked quickly, her hands steady as she stitched a gash along the shoulder of a young warrior who'd been careless during training. He winced, but didn't complain, watching her work with something like awe. "You're good at this," he said quietly. Aria offered a small smile. "It's what I was trained to do. Still, we're lucky to have you." The words were kind, but they felt hollow. Lucky. She didn't feel lucky. She felt like a mistake that everyone was too polite to correct. She was tying off the final stitch when she felt it, that familiar shift in the air, the way the temperature seemed to drop and sharpen all at once. She didn't need to turn around to know he was there. Alpha King Kale stood in the doorway of the infirmary, silent as a shadow. His golden eyes were fixed on her hands where they rested on the warrior's bare shoulder, and his expression was unreadable. But his jaw was tight, his posture rigid, and Aria's stomach twisted with anxiety. "He's angry," she thought. "I've done something wrong again." She pulled her hands back quickly, stepping away from the warrior as if she'd been burned. The young man glanced between them, confusion flickering across his face before he wisely decided to leave. He mumbled his thanks and hurried out, leaving Aria alone with the king. Kale said nothing. He simply stood there, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Aria busied herself with cleaning her instruments, desperate for something to do with her hands. "Your Majesty," she said softly, still not looking at him. "Did you need something?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, finally, no. But he didn't leave. Aria's hands trembled as she wiped down the counter. She could feel his gaze on her like a physical weight, and she didn't understand it. Didn't understand why he came here, why he watched her, why he always looked at her like she was something that caused him pain. When she finally dared to glance up, he was already gone. 2 days later, Aria was in the Great Hall organizing supplies when she heard the commotion. A group of warriors had gathered near the entrance, their voices raised in what sounded like an argument. She tried to ignore it. Tried to focus on her work, but then she heard her name. "The weak Luna choice," one of them sneered. What was the oracle thinking? Aria's chest tightened. She kept her head down, pretending she hadn't heard. "She's barely fit to serve as a healer, let alone." The voice cut off with a choked sound. Aria looked up to see Kale with his hand wrapped around the warrior's throat, lifting him slightly off the ground. The king's face was a mask of cold fury, his eyes blazing with a rage that made the temperature in the room plummet. "Say her name again," Kale said, his voice deadly quiet. "I dare you." The warrior's face had gone purple. His companions stood frozen, none of them brave enough to intervene. After what felt like an eternity, Kale released him, letting him drop to the floor gasping. "Get out of my sight," the king commanded. They fled. Aria stood there, stunned, her arms full of linens. Kale turned toward her, and for a heartbeat their eyes met. She saw something raw in his expression, something almost like anguish, but then his face shuttered closed, and he walked away without a word. She doesn't understand, Aria thought miserably. He's ashamed. Ashamed that the oracle chose someone so beneath him, and now he has to defend me to save his own pride. The realization hurt more than the insults themselves. The full moon feast arrived with all its pageantry and excess. Aria had tried to excuse herself, but the head steward insisted that all those chosen by the oracle must attend. So she stood at the edge of the great hall in a simple blue dress, feeling utterly out of place among the silk and jewels and laughter. She watched Kale from across the room. He stood near the throne, impossibly handsome in his formal attire, surrounded by nobles and dignitaries. A noblewoman approached him, Lady Seraphine, beautiful and elegant, and extended her hand. The music shifted, and they moved onto the dance floor together. Aria's heart cracked down the middle. She knew she had no right to feel this way. Knew that whatever the Moon Oracle had intended, it clearly wasn't meant to be. Kale would choose someone worthy. Someone strong and graceful and perfect. Someone who wasn't her. She was so lost in her misery that she almost missed it, the way Kale's eyes found hers across the crowded room. His gaze locked onto her with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs, burning with something she couldn't name. Want. Anger. Desperation. Then he looked away, his jaw clenched, and continued dancing. Aria couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. She turned and fled through the nearest door, her vision blurring with tears. She found herself in the moonlit garden, gasping for air, pressing her hands against her chest as if she could physically hold her heart together. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her. Didn't realize she wasn't alone until she felt the presence at her back close, so close she could feel the heat of him. Kale stood 3 feet away, his hand half raised as if to reach for her. His face was tortured, his breathing ragged. But he didn't move. Didn't speak. And after a moment that felt like forever, he turned and walked back into the darkness, leaving Aria alone with her tears and the cold light of the moon. Aria stared at the bundle of medicinal herbs in her arms and wished she could be anywhere else in the world. The head healer had been clear. The Alpha King required treatment for injuries sustained during the rogue attack at the northern border. He'd refused to come to the infirmary. Someone needed to bring the supplies to his private chambers. That someone, apparently, was Aria. She stood outside the massive oak doors for a full minute, trying to steady her breathing. She'd never been to his chambers before. Had never been alone with him in any space that felt this intimate, this private. Her hand shook as she raised it to knock. The sound echoed through the empty corridor. For a moment, nothing. Then heavy footsteps and the door swung open. Aria's breath caught in her throat. Kale stood before her shirtless, his chest and abdomen marked with fresh bruises and a long gash that ran from his collarbone to his ribs. Blood had dried in dark streaks across his skin. His hair was loose, falling around his face, and his golden eyes were slightly unfocused with pain. He was devastating. Aria's voice failed her. She held up the bundle of herbs like a shield. The head healer sent me. For your injuries. Kale's jaw tightened. For a terrible moment she thought he would slam the door in her face. Instead, he stepped aside, his voice low and rough. Stay. It wasn't a request. Aria entered on unsteady legs. His chambers were sparse despite their size, dark wood furniture, weapons mounted on the walls, a massive bed with black silk sheets. It smelled of pine and leather, and something distinctly him that made her head spin. She set the supplies on a nearby table, grateful for something to focus on. You should sit, she said quietly, not quite meeting his eyes. This will need to be cleaned properly. Kale moved to a chair near the fireplace, lowering himself with barely concealed pain. Aria gathered what she needed, cloths, antiseptic, needle and thread, and approached him like one might approach a wounded wolf. Dangerous even when hurt. Perhaps especially then. She knelt beside him, trying to ignore the way her pulse hammered in her ears. This close, she could see the tension in every line of his body, could feel the heat radiating from his skin. She dampened a cloth and began cleaning the wound with gentle efficiency. Kale's breath hissed through his teeth. I'm sorry, Aria murmured. I'm trying to be careful. It's not the pain. His voice was so strained that her hands faltered. She glanced up at his face and found him staring at the wall, his fists clenched on the arms of the chair, every muscle rigid with restraint. She returned to her work, trying to ignore the strange ache in her chest. Her fingers brushed against his skin as she cleaned the wound, and she felt him go impossibly more still beneath her touch. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. When she reached for the needle to stitch the deeper part of the gash, her hand accidentally pressed against his chest for balance. Kale made a sound low in his throat, not quite a growl, not quite a groan, and his hand shot up to catch her wrist. Aria froze. His grip was gentle despite its suddenness, his thumb resting against her racing pulse. They stayed like that for a heartbeat, 2, 3. His eyes finally met hers, and what she saw there made her forget how to breathe. Hunger. Agony. Longing so fierce it was almost violent. Slowly, as if moving through water, Kale's free hand rose toward her face. His fingers trembled as they neared her cheek, and Aria found herself leaning into the touch without meaning to. He jerked back as if burned, releasing her wrist and turning his face away. His breathing was ragged, his hands clenched into fists again. "Finish," he said roughly. Aria's throat felt tight. Her hands shook as she completed the stitching, working in silence, while something fragile shattered between them. When she tied off the final stitch, she should have left. Should have gathered her supplies and fled. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "Why?" Kale's shoulders tensed. "Why what? Why do you look at everyone except me?" The words came out broken, small. "What did I do to make you hate me so much?" The silence that followed was deafening. Kale's entire body had gone rigid, his jaw so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a growl. "Do not ask questions you are not ready to hear answers to." It felt like a slap. Aria stood quickly, gathering her supplies with trembling hands. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. It won't happen again." She fled before he could say anything else, before the tears could start falling. She didn't see the way Kale's hands gripped the arms of the chair hard enough to crack the wood. Didn't hear the tortured sound that escaped him once the door closed. He sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, his chest heaving with emotions he couldn't name. Finally, he rose and moved to his bed, collapsing onto it like a man defeated. "If she knew the truth," he whispered into the darkness, his voice breaking, "she would never forgive me." Outside, the wind howled against the windows, carrying secrets the night refused to tell. The rumor spread through the palace like poison in the bloodstream. Aria first heard it from the kitchen maids, whispered over bread dough and vegetable peelings, their voices low but not low enough. "Lady Seraphine. An engagement announcement. Before the week's end." She dropped the basket of herbs she'd been carrying. No one noticed. By midday, the rumor had grown teeth. The servants spoke of it openly now, excitement rippling through the palace. The Alpha King would finally take a proper mate. Lady Seraphine was perfect, beautiful, powerful, from a bloodline as old as the moon itself. The Oracle's choice had been a mistake, everyone agreed, but soon it would be corrected. Soon, everything would be as it should be. Aria made it to her room before the tears came. She pressed her back against the door and slid down to the floor, her hand over her mouth to muffle the sobs that tore from her chest. It hurt. Gods, it hurt in a way she hadn't known was possible. Because somewhere between his cold silences and burning glances, between the moments he almost touched her and the times he walked away, she had fallen in love with him. It was a foolish, impossible, devastating love. The kind that lived in stolen glances and unspoken words, in the way her heart raced when he entered a room, and the way her skin remembered the ghost of his almost touch. She'd tried to stop it. Had told herself 1,000 times that he didn't want her, that she was nothing to him. But the heart, it seemed, didn't listen to reason. And now he would marry someone else. Someone worthy. Someone who wouldn't make him look away in what she'd convinced herself was disgust. Aria pressed her palms against her eyes and tried to breathe through the pain. She couldn't stay here. Couldn't watch him pledge himself to another. Couldn't serve in a palace where every stone would remind her of what she'd never have. She would ask him to release her. Today. Before the announcement made it impossible. Before her heart broke any further. She found him in the war room, alone, studying maps spread across a massive table. Evening light slanted through the tall windows, turning his dark hair bronze. He didn't look up when she entered, but his shoulders tensed, and she knew he'd sensed her presence. "Your Majesty," she said, and hated how her voice trembled. "I need to speak with you." "Then speak." His voice was rough, tired. Aria forced herself to step closer. "Is it true?" Now he looked up. His golden eyes were shadowed, unreadable. Is what true? The engagement. The word tasted like ash. To Lady Seraphine. Is it true? Something flickered across Kale's face, shock, perhaps, or pain, but it was gone too quickly for her to name. His jaw tightened. Where did you hear that? Everyone's talking about it. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the pieces together. The announcement is supposed to be this week. Kale's hands flattened on the table, his knuckles white. He said nothing. The silence was confirmation enough. I understand, Aria whispered, and she did. She understood perfectly. You never wanted me here. The Oracle's choice was a mistake, and now you're correcting it. Her voice cracked. I just want to know if you hate me so much that you need me gone before the announcement. If my presence is truly that unbearable to you. Aria, her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a curse all at once. Please. She was crying now, couldn't stop the tears even though she wanted desperately to maintain some dignity. Just tell me the truth. Tell me what I did to make you despise me, and I'll leave. I'll go tonight. You'll never have to look through me again. Kale moved around the table so fast she barely saw him. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the storm raging in his eyes, the way his hands shook before he clenched them into fists. You think I hate you? His voice was low, dangerous. What else am I supposed to think? The words burst from her like a wound opening. You can't stand to be near me. You look at me like I cause you pain. You were planning to send me away. To protect you. The words rang through the war room like a thunderclap. Kale's chest was heaving, his control fracturing, and Aria could only stare at him in confusion. Protect me from what? But he'd already turned away, one hand coming up to grip the back of his neck. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled, each word forced through gritted teeth. You don't understand. You can't understand. Then explain it to me. I can't. The finality in those 2 words shattered something inside her. Aria pulled a folded parchment from her pocket, the letter of resignation she'd written and rewritten a dozen times. She set it on the table between them with trembling hands. Then I'm resigning from my position as palace healer. Effective immediately. Kale spun to face her, his eyes going wide. No. You can't stop me. The hell I can't. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, snatching the parchment and tearing it in half. You're not leaving. Aria's fear was eclipsed by a sudden flash of anger. You don't own me. I'm not your prisoner. You don't understand what you're asking for. His voice was ragged now, desperate. If you leave, if you're not under the palace's protection. I don't want your protection, she shouted, and watched him flinch as if she'd struck him. I want to stop feeling like this. I want to stop loving someone who can't even stand to look at me. The words hung in the air between them, terrible and true. Kale's face went absolutely still. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it, what did you say? But Aria was already backing toward the door, horrified at what she'd revealed. I'm leaving. Tonight. You can't. Kale's fist came down on the table with a sound like thunder. The heavy oak split straight down the middle, pieces scattering across the floor. Aria froze, her heart hammering. When Kale looked at her again, his eyes were wild, barely human. Guards, he roared. 2 warriors appeared in the doorway immediately, their hands on their weapons. No one, Kale said, his voice shaking with barely controlled violence, lets her leave this palace. Is that understood? The guards exchanged glances, then nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. Aria felt the world tilting beneath her feet. You can't do this. Watch me. He was breathing hard, his hands still clenched into fists. You're staying here where I can. He cut himself off, jaw tightening. You're staying. That's final. You're a monster, she whispered, the words breaking. She saw him absorb the blow, saw the way it landed like a physical strike. His face went carefully blank, and when he spoke again, his voice was empty of all emotion. Yes, he said. I am. Aria fled before she could say anything else. The guards followed at a distance, silent shadows that confirmed what she now knew. She was trapped here. Trapped by a king who couldn't stand her presence but refused to let her go. She didn't understand. Didn't understand any of it. In the war room, Kale stood among the ruins of the shattered table, his chest heaving. He'd heard her confession, those devastating words that confirmed his worst fear and his deepest hope. She loved him, and she thought he hated her. Gods, he whispered, pressing his palms against his eyes. Forgive me. But forgiveness, he knew, was something he didn't deserve. Not when she didn't know the truth. Not when telling her would destroy everything. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, heavy with rain that refused to fall. The alarm bell shattered the midnight silence. Aria woke with a gasp, her heart already racing before her mind caught up to what the sound meant. Breach. The palace was under attack. She stumbled from her bed, throwing a robe over her nightgown, her healer's instincts overriding her fear. There would be wounded. She needed to get to the infirmary, needed to prepare. The sound of snarling froze her in place. It was close. Too close. Coming from the courtyard just outside her window. Her hands shook as she moved to look, pressing herself against the wall beside the glass. The courtyard was bathed in silver moonlight, and in that cold illumination she could see them, 3 massive wolves, their fur matted and dark, their eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light. Rogues. One of them was circling something near the fountain, its lips pulled back to reveal teeth like daggers. It took Aria a moment to realize what it was stalking. A servant girl. Barely 15. Frozen with terror. Aria didn't think. She grabbed the iron poker from her small fireplace and ran. She burst into the courtyard screaming, waving the poker like a weapon, desperate to draw the rogue's attention away from the girl. It worked. The wolf's head snapped toward her, its eyes fixing on her with predatory focus. Run! Aria shouted at the girl. Go! The servant fled. The wolf started toward Aria instead. She backed up slowly, her hands white-knuckled on the poker. 2 more wolves emerged from the shadows, flanking her. She was surrounded. The iron poker suddenly felt like a child's toy. The largest wolf lunged. Aria swung the poker with all her strength, but the wolf twisted midair, its jaws snapping inches from her throat. She fell backward, hitting the stone ground hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. The poker clattered away. The wolf loomed over her, its breath hot and rancid, saliva dripping onto her face as it prepared for the killing blow. Then the world exploded with violence. Something huge and golden collided with the rogue, tearing it away from Aria with a sound like thunder. She scrambled backward, watching in frozen horror and awe as a massive wolf, larger than any she'd ever seen, with fur the color of moonlight and eyes that burned like molten gold, tore into the rogues with savage precision. Kale. She knew it was him the moment she saw those eyes. Would have known him in any form. He was magnificent and terrifying, all lethal grace and barely controlled fury. He moved like violence made flesh, like a storm given teeth and claws. The first rogue died quickly, its neck snapping between his jaws. The second tried to run. Kale ran it down and ripped out its throat. The third, the largest, fought back. They collided in a tangle of fur and fangs, rolling across the courtyard. Aria watched in helpless terror as they tore at each other, blood spattering the white stone. The rogue was vicious, experienced, but Kale was something else entirely, a force of nature, unstoppable, driven by something more than mere survival instinct. The rogue's jaws closed around Kale's shoulder. Aria heard herself scream. Kale didn't make a sound. He twisted, faster than should have been possible for something his size, and locked his jaws around the rogue's spine. One violent shake, and it was over. Silence fell over the courtyard, broken only by ragged breathing. Kale stood over the dead rogues, his massive form heaving, blood dripping from his shoulder and flank. Then he turned toward Aria, and even in wolf form she could see the frantic question in his eyes. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she whispered. He shifted. The transformation was fluid, almost beautiful, and then Kale was kneeling there in human form, naked and bleeding, his golden eyes still wild. He tried to stand and swayed, his hand going to his wounded shoulder. Aria was at his side before she could think, her hands reaching for him instinctively. "You're hurt. Gods, you're bleeding. You." His voice was hoarse, wrecked. "You could have died. But I didn't. You saved me. You could have died." He said it again, as if the words were the only ones he knew. His hand came up to grip her arm, his fingers trembling. "You could have died, and I." He broke off, his jaw clenching so hard she could see the muscle jumping. There were tears in his eyes now, bright and terrible against the gold. "Aria," he whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer, like a confession, like something breaking open after being held too long. Aria. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. She reached up with shaking hands and cupped his face, feeling the rough stubble against her palms, the heat of him, the way he leaned into her touch like a man dying of thirst. "Why?" she asked, her own tears falling now. "Why do you do this? Why do you save me when you can't even stand to be near me?" "Stand to be near you?" He laughed, and it was the most broken sound she'd ever heard. "Do you know what it costs me to stay away? Do you have any idea?" He stopped himself, his eyes squeezing shut, his hand coming up to cover one of hers against his face. When he opened them again, the vulnerability she saw there was almost painful. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't tell you. Not yet." "Tell me what?" But he was swaying again, the blood loss catching up to him. "Gods, we need to get you inside. Can you walk?" "Don't know. Don't care." But he let her help him stand, let her slip under his uninjured arm and guide him toward the palace. Someone brought a cloak that Aria wrapped around him. Guards swarmed the courtyard, checking for more rogues, but Kale seemed oblivious to all of it. His attention was fixed on her, his hand gripping hers so tightly it almost hurt. They made it to his chambers. Aria barely registered the shocked looks from servants as they passed. She helped him to his bed, tried to pull away to get supplies, but his hand tightened on hers. "Don't," he said roughly. "Don't let go." So she didn't. She sat beside him on the bed, her free hand working to clean and bind his wounds while he held on to her like she was the only thing anchoring him to this world. "You scared me," she whispered as she tied off the bandage on his shoulder. "When he bit you, I thought." "I know." His thumb traced circles on her palm, the gesture unconscious, tender. "I heard you scream. I thought I was going to watch you die. Never." His eyes found hers, burning with an intensity that stole her breath. "I would tear apart 1,000 rogues before I let anything happen to you. I would burn down kingdoms. I would." He stopped himself again, his jaw clenching, but this time Aria saw the truth written plainly in his eyes. This wasn't duty. This wasn't obligation. This was something else entirely. "Kale," she whispered, but he closed his eyes, his face turning away. "It's almost midnight," he said, his voice hollow. "You should go." Before, he swallowed hard. "Please. Go." But his hand still held hers, and he made no move to release her. Aria stayed. Outside, the moon climbed higher, full and bright and merciless. And in the distance, as midnight bells began to toll, neither of them knew that everything was about to change. Aria had fallen asleep in the chair beside Kale's bed, her hand still clasped in his. She woke to the sound of her own name being screamed. "Aria." Kale was thrashing in the bed, his face twisted in anguish, his body slick with sweat despite the cool night air. The moonlight streaming through the windows painted him in silver and shadow, making him look almost otherworldly in his torment. "No," he was gasping. "No, please, Aria." She was at his side in an instant, her hands on his face, trying to wake him. "Kale. Kale, I'm here. I'm right here." His eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. For a moment he stared at her as if she were a ghost, his chest heaving. Then his hands shot up to grip hers where they rested against his face, holding them there with desperate strength. "You're alive," he whispered. "Gods, you're alive." "Of course I'm alive. You're safe. The rogues are gone. Everything's. I saw you die." His voice broke on the words. "In my dream, I saw them tear you apart, and I couldn't reach you in time. I couldn't save you. Your blood was on my hands, and you were looking at me like..." He stopped, a sound like a sob catching in his throat. Like you were asking why I let it happen. It was just a dream, Aria said softly, her thumbs brushing away the tears on his face. I'm here. I'm safe. Because I got there in time. But what about next time? What about the time after that? His hands were shaking, his golden eyes bright with unshed tears, and something that looked like fear. I can't lose you. I can't. Kale, you're not making sense. Why would you lose me? Because I love you. The words exploded from him like a dam breaking, raw and anguished and terrible in their honesty. Aria went absolutely still, certain she'd misheard, certain this was her own dream. What? Kale's laugh was broken, edged with hysteria. You want the truth? Finally? Here it is. He pulled her hands against his chest, holding them over his racing heart. I never hated you, Aria. Not for one single moment. I avoided you because you are mine. My mate. My true fated mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself. The world tilted beneath her feet. That's not, the oracle never said. The oracle doesn't announce fated mates. She simply places them in proximity and lets fate do the rest. His voice was ragged, years of restraint crumbling with every word. I knew the moment you walked through those palace gates. I felt the bond snap into place like a brand on my soul. You are mine and I am yours, and every moment I've spent looking away from you has been torture. Aria couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Then why? Why would you? Because there's a curse. The words came out barely above a whisper. An ancient curse on my bloodline, placed by a witch my great-grandfather scorned. Every alpha king in my line who has claimed their mate, who has loved them openly, has watched them die. His hands tightened on hers, desperate. Poisoned. Assassinated. Accidents that were never accidents. The curse finds a way. Always. No, Aria breathed. My father loved my mother more than life itself. She died 3 months after their mating ceremony. He never recovered. Kale's voice was hollow now, reciting facts that had haunted him his entire life. My grandfather before him. My great-uncle. Every one of them watched their mates die because they dared to claim what the moon goddess gave them. The pieces were falling into place now, each one a fresh wound. So you stayed away. I thought if I didn't claim you, if I didn't acknowledge the bond, if no one knew, his voice broke. I thought I could keep you safe. I thought loving you from a distance would be enough. That I could protect you by pretending you meant nothing to me. The engagement rumor, Aria whispered. To Lady Seraphine. A lie. A convenient fiction that I neither confirmed nor denied because I thought. He laughed bitterly. I thought it would make you hate me. Thought it would make you want to leave. That you'd be safer anywhere but here, anywhere but near me. But you wouldn't let me go. Because I'm a selfish bastard. The self-loathing in his voice was palpable. Because even knowing I'm poison to you, even knowing I'll be your death, I can't let you go. I can't breathe when you're not near me. I can't sleep without knowing you're safe in this palace. Tonight, when I saw that rogue standing over you, his whole body shuddered. I would have torn the world apart. Would have killed every living thing between me and you. Aria was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. All this time. All this pain and misunderstanding and loneliness, and he'd been suffering too. Loving her. Protecting her in the only way he knew how. You should have told me, she choked out. You should have. And what would you have done? His eyes met hers, bright with anguish. Would you have run? Would you have insisted on staying? Either way, the curse would have found you. At least this way, with you thinking I hated you, you were careful. You kept your distance. You survived. That wasn't surviving. Her hands fisted in his shirt. That was dying slowly. Every day, thinking you couldn't stand the sight of me, thinking I was some unwanted burden. Never. He pulled her closer, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. Never unwanted. Never a burden. You are everything, Aria. Everything I wanted and everything I cannot have. I have loved you since the moment I first saw you walk through those gates. Loved you through every painful second I forced myself to look away. Loved you every time I walked past you in the halls and had to clench my fists to keep from reaching for you. The night in the infirmary, she whispered. When you almost touched my face. I wanted so badly to touch you, to hold you, to tell you. His voice broke completely. But I knew if I did, if I gave in even once, I wouldn't be able to stop. And then you would die, and it would be my fault. Aria pulled back just enough to look at him, to see the tears streaming down his face, to witness the raw devastation in his golden eyes. And what now? What changes? Nothing. Everything. I don't know. His hands came up to frame her face with a tenderness that made her heart ache. I can't keep pretending you mean nothing to me. But I can't claim you either. Can't announce you as my mate. Can't, he swallowed hard. Can't keep you safe if the curse knows you're mine. Then we'll break the curse. Aria. No. Her voice was fierce now, determined. I didn't survive these months of heartbreak just to lose you to fear. There has to be a way. And if there isn't? His thumbs brushed away her tears even as his own fell. If the only way to keep you alive is to keep pretending? Aria's next words came from somewhere deep and true, from a part of her that had been forged in loneliness and tempered by love. I would rather die loving you openly than live 100 years thinking you hated me. At least then I would die happy. Don't say that. His voice was ragged. Don't ever say that. It's the truth. She pressed closer, their foreheads touching, their tears mingling together. I love you, Kale. I've loved you even when I thought you despised me. I'll love you through whatever comes next. Curse or no curse. Aria. He whispered her name like a prayer, like a plea, like the first words of a confession he'd held back too long. My Aria. They stayed like that as the moon climbed higher, two broken souls, finally finding each other in the darkness. The curse still loomed between them, terrible and real. But for this moment, this one perfect moment, they allowed themselves to hold each other and grieve for all the time they'd lost. Outside, the midnight bells finished their tolling. Somewhere in the palace, ancient magic stirred and took notice. And in the shadows beyond the windows, something watched and waited, patient as death itself. The truth was finally revealed. But the real danger was only just beginning. Dawn found them still together, Kale sitting against the headboard with Aria curled against his chest, his arms wrapped around her as if he could shield her from the world through sheer will alone. I should go, she whispered, though she made no move to leave. People will talk if they find me here. Let them talk. His voice was rough from lack of sleep, but there was steel beneath it. I'm done hiding what you mean to me. Aria tilted her head back to look at him. The curse. We'll find a way. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek with a tenderness that made her breath catch. Together. No more distance. No more pretending. I can't do it anymore, Aria. I won't. Before she could respond, urgent knocking echoed through the chamber. Kale. Arms tightened around her protectively before he called out, Enter. His head advisor stepped in, stopping short when he saw them. His eyes widened, but to his credit, he recovered quickly. Your Majesty, the court is gathering. There are rumors about the Lady Seraphine. What rumors? Aria asked quietly. That she herself started the engagement whispers to force the king's hand, to pressure him into a political match. The advisor's gaze flicked between them. The truth has come out. She's been exposed before the entire court. Kale's jaw tightened. Gather everyone in the throne room. Every noble, every warrior, every servant. I want the entire palace assembled within the hour. Your Majesty, I have an announcement to make. The throne room was packed. Aria stood in the shadows near the back, her heart hammering as she watched Kale take his place on the dais. He looked every inch the Alpha King, powerful, commanding, untouchable. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the arms of his throne. Lady Seraphine stood before him, her face pale but defiant. Your Majesty, I can explain. You spread lies about an engagement that never existed, Kale said, his voice carrying through the cavernous room. You manipulated my court, put your ambitions above truth, and attempted to force my hand through deception. I only wanted what was best for the kingdom. That girl the Oracle chose is nobody. She has no power, no connections, no. Enough. The single word was a crack of thunder. Seraphine fell silent, and the entire court seemed to hold its breath. Kale stood, and when he spoke again, his voice was clear and absolute. "I call forth Aria, healer of this court, chosen by the Moon Oracle." Every head turned toward the back of the room. Aria's legs trembled as she stepped forward, walking down the center aisle. Whispers erupted around her, but she kept her eyes on Kale, on the man who loved her, who had suffered in silence to keep her safe. She climbed the steps to the dais and stood before him, her chin lifted, meeting his gaze without flinching. 3 months ago, the Oracle placed this woman in my path, Kale said, his eyes never leaving hers. I thought it was a test. A cruel joke from the moon goddess herself. Because the moment she walked through those gates, I knew. He took her hand, and the touch sent electricity through her entire body. Aria is my true fated mate. The one chosen not by politics or strategy or alliance, but by destiny itself. His voice grew stronger with each word. I have loved her from that first moment. I have suffered loving her. I have tried to deny it, to protect her from a curse that has haunted my bloodline for generations. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Aria felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, but all that mattered was Kale's hand in hers, warm and steady. But I'm done hiding, done pretending, done letting fear rule my heart. He turned to address the court fully, his voice ringing with authority. I claim Aria as my mate, my Luna, my queen. And any who oppose this can challenge me directly. Silence. No one moved. No one dared. Then Kale's face went white. He gasped, his hand flying to his chest, and stumbled backward. Aria caught him, her healer's instinct screaming as she felt his heart racing, stuttering, failing. The curse, he choked out. Aria, you need to. No. She gripped his face between her hands, fierce and unafraid. No. I don't accept this. I don't accept a curse that says we can't love each other. I don't accept a destiny that ends in your fear and my death. Aria, I choose you. Her voice rang clear through the throne room. I choose this bond. I choose us. And I don't care what ancient magic says otherwise. Then she kissed him. The moment their lips met, something inside Aria ignited. She felt it, the bond that had been hovering between them, waiting, hoping. It snapped into place with a force that stole her breath, brilliant and burning and absolutely right. Light exploded from where they stood, pure white and blinding. The throne room flooded with it, and Aria felt power surge through her veins, not borrowed, not given, but earned. The power of a Luna accepting her mate. The power of love freely chosen. The curse tried to hold. She felt it, a dark writhing thing attempting to strangle the bond before it could fully form. But Aria's love was stronger. Her choice was stronger. She poured everything she had into that kiss, into Kale, into the bond that connected them. The darkness shattered like glass. Kale gasped against her mouth, and suddenly his arms were around her, lifting her off her feet, holding her so tightly she couldn't breathe. When she pulled back, his eyes were blazing with gold light, healthy and whole and alive. You broke it, he whispered, wonder in his voice. Aria, you broke the curse. No. She touched his face, feeling tears stream down her own. We broke it. Together. The light slowly faded, leaving them standing in a throne room full of stunned witnesses. The bond thrummed between them now, golden and unbreakable, visible to anyone with the eyes to see it. Kale's forehead pressed against hers. You saved me, he said roughly. From the curse. From my own fear. From myself. You saved me first, she whispered back. From those rogues. From a life half-lived. From loneliness. He kissed her again, tender and reverent, and the court erupted in cheers. That night, under the full moon, they ran together. 2 wolves, one golden, one silver. Racing through the forest as one soul, finally and completely united. The bond sang between them, pure and true, untainted by fear or curses or doubt. Aria had once thought he hated her. Had believed she was unwanted, unworthy, a mistake the Oracle had made. But she had been wrong. Midnight hadn't just revealed the truth. It had revealed their destiny, a love that was strong enough to break curses, brave enough to face fear, and true enough to rewrite fate itself. And as they ran beneath the stars, their howls harmonizing in the darkness, both of them knew this was only the beginning.